So there's this rock, right? But then it's an egg, but then just kidding again, it's actually a stone monkey. And way up in heaven, the Jade Emperor notices this, but doesn't think much of it. Meanwhile, the stone monkey has been doing work, hanging out with other monkeys, discovering a nice house behind a waterfall, and becoming the Monkey King. And all this is good until the Monkey King has an existential crisis and goes on a journey to learn the way and become immortal. Eventually, after about 20 years of nagging a monk to teach him, the Monkey King learns how to be immortal, do 72 earthly transformations, jump good, like 60 miles good, and he also gets a name, Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong is eventually sent home though because the monk no longer wants to be associated with him. Upon returning home, he beats up a demon king that's been kidnapping his monkey people, and to prevent further kidnapping, he decides that his crew needs new drip. So he visits the Dragon King, who he harasses into giving him a staff and a suit of armor, which he harasses out of all 4 Dragon King brothers. And sometime later, Sun Wukong gets dragged to the underworld, which really just pisses him off more than anything. So he breaks into the palace of the 10 Kings of Hell and removes not only his name, but the name of all his monkey people from the death registry, making them all immortal before returning home. As you might expect, the 10 Kings of Hell and the Dragon King are not so happy with Sun Wukong, so they do as they would and file a complaint to the Jade Emperor, who soon realizes he played himself when he asked who caused all this trouble and remembered that one rock. But rather than fighting Sun Wukong, who is quite powerful, they decide to bring him into heaven to keep him from causing any more trouble. Sun Wukong is given the role of Ban Horseplague, which he soon realizes is just a glorified stable boy, so he leaves heaven in a rage, taking up the title of Great Sage Equal to Heaven all by himself. With that, the Jade Emperor sends down some folks to take him down, but Sun Wukong ends up beating them, and they end up giving him the empty title along with a place in heaven, and eventually a job when they decide that an idle Sun Wukong would only stir up trouble, as the guardian of the peach orchard. And everything is good and great until Sun Wukong makes a series of very bad decisions before the peach banquet that included eating all the peaches in the orchard, deceiving a god to sneak into the banquet, sneaking into the banquet, and stealing and drinking all their alcohol, stumbling into Lao Shu's slice of heaven and gobbling up his immortality pills, and then fleeing from heaven to evade punishment. However, his shenanigans is eventually discovered, and this time, for real, all the forces of heaven descend onto Sun Wukong and his monkey people in an all-out war. After a lot of fighting, Sun Wukong is eventually defeated by Erlang, he's like a famous hero or something, and captured. They try to execute him, but it doesn't work out because Sun Wukong is like quadruple immortal or something now because of all the stuff he stole/ate, and ends up making a havoc in heaven. Eventually, the Buddha shows up and makes a bet with Sun Wukong that if he could jump out of the palm of his hand, he could rule heaven for himself. Turns out the entire world is the palm of Buddha's hand, and he locks up Sun Wukong under a mountain. The end. So that's the first 7 chapters of Journey to the West, a 16th century 100-chapter epic novel that is way too long for me to read for this inquiry, attributed to Wu Chen-en, but like maybe not, he might have written it, who knows. And now you might be wondering, what is this book even about? Further reading later, turns out Sun Wukong is not the protagonist of this book, even though the first 7 chapters are about him. That title belongs to the real-life Buddhist monk the book is based off, Tang Zhengzhen, and his, you guessed it, journey to the West, to collect Buddhist scriptures from India during the Tang Dynasty. So knowing that, why did I just liberally paraphrase the story of Sun Wukong, who later becomes a disciple of Sangzan later in the story? Firstly, there was no way I finished the entire book for this inquiry, and half of it would have been lost in translation anyways. But I did notice something very interesting about these first few 7 chapters that has to do with the presentation of religion in the text. First of all, though it may not have been evident in my crude retelling, the book depicts 3 of China's largest religions at the time of publication and today: Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Another important thing to note is that Journey to the West was published during the Ming Dynasty, a time where all 3 religions were present and practiced within China. There were also prominent Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities, which is kind of interesting. So the integration of many religious elements in the story would not have been strange in the slightest, as religious heterogeneity would have been commonplace. Anyhow, to briefly summarize 3 of some of the world's most popular religions, Buddhism is about not caring about the material world and being vegan, Taoism is about balance and going with the flow, it also builds on Chinese mythos, and Confucianism is about respecting your elders and following the rules. Note, these are extremely oversimplified descriptions of very complex belief system. Confucianism isn't even a religion. For the purposes of comedy and time. And these oversimplified values can be seen presented in the novel. Taoism and Buddhism are evident from the characters of the Buddha and Lao Shi, both of whom being real-life people as well as religious/mythological figures. Lao Shi is the founder of Taoism. Sun Wukong steals his immortality pills, in case you forgot. Attitudes of Confucianism can be seen in the bureaucratic structure of the Jade Emperor's court and general attitude towards elders, teachers, and monks. The often mentioned kowtow is an example of that. So what does the story's presentation of religion tell us about its themes? Well, the fact that it is the Buddha that is successful in containing the mischievous monkey in the end might point to a preference of the author towards Buddhism. Sun Wukong is often interpreted as a representation of the impulsive instinct of humanity. A key piece of evidence is the common Chinese saying, and forgive me for using the Cantonese pronunciation, "Some sing yi ma," meaning literally heart of monkey, mind of horse. Sun Wukong is the monkey in the saying. Here's a poem in the book that says just that. From his birth, he desires more constantly, striving for immortality and gaining power equal to heaven, quite literally. The many attempts and failures of the Jade Emperor's bureaucracy to contain Sun Wukong can easily be interpreted as the failure of Taoist belief to tame the most impulsive and uncontrolled aspect of human nature. Buddha's success, where all the gods and deities of the ancient Chinese pantheon failed, indicates a preference towards Buddhism in moral prowess and virtue. Even the gods of the Jade Emperor's court bow to Buddha. So does that mean that Journey to the West, a story about a Buddhist pilgrimage, is a novel that argues for the virtue of Buddhism over other religious beliefs during a time when one's options were well open? Like, not really, and I don't mean to undermine my entire analysis from just now, but there are other things in the novels that I didn't mention. Mostly that it is a satire, and for a long time was considered just a satire about the incompetence of Chinese bureaucracy at the time, and is like really funny. I mean, I digress, but the fact that the Dragon King and the 10 Kings of Hell file a complaint to the Jade Emperor is so funny to me. Like, it's funny in a way that's so disconnected to the fantasy hyper-violence of the entire novel that it's almost postmodern. It almost feels postmodern. Anyways, the novel makes fun of religion. It makes fun of bureaucracy. It makes satire and parody of all three religions in subtle ways I could not begin to comprehend, with the exception of the Buddha sometimes. But while doing this, it also mixes its use of all three. As Anthony Yu says in his introduction of the first volume of his revised Journey to the West, to craft a story radically different from a synopsis of secular canonical or Buddhist history, the author has manipulated idioms and terms from selected writings in both the Buddhist and Taoist canon. This mixing or harmonization of religious text reflects a three religions as one mentality. This belief was common during the Ming Dynasty, most likely developed over years of integration of the three beliefs. It was so prevalent that by the late Ming Dynasty, the three religions as one mentality had gained widespread adherence throughout the populace. This reading of Journey to the West is a new one, and in a way reactionary to the past interpretations, so I could not begin to take part in the discourse of it just due to my general lack of knowledge in the novel and religion to begin with. But I suppose it just goes to show how complex and thought out the writing of this novel was, pulling from its religious history, contemporary and past beliefs and text, to write something so ingrained in its time and context, yet so fun. Overall, it's a really great novel, and I'm kind of sad that I will never be able to experience it as it was meant to be experienced in its time. But that's that. So, in conclusion, Journey to the West is a very long, complex novel that is 1 part comedic adventure story, 2 parts satire of Chinese bureaucracy, and all about Chinese culture and religion under layers upon layers of cultural context, both in time and space. Much too long and complex for me to understand, but I tried my best. Thanks for watching!